Jordan Hale had learned, over years of arraignments and fluorescent hallways, that most emergencies arrived loud. Sirens, slammed doors, voices raised to drown out fear. This one slid under his office door in a manila envelope, unpostmarked, quiet as dust. Inside was a photocopy of his senior year essay, The Loneliness of Long Hallways. The toner had gone a brittle gray at the edges. His teenage sentences leaned into each other like kids waiting for the last bus. In the margins, Grace Whitaker's handwriting raced and steadied, then rested, red ink that saw him, then in a way he couldn't bear to be seen. Start where it hurts, but don't end there. And lower, beside a paragraph that had tried to sound braver than it felt. You are not the worst thing you fear you are. He'd kept the original for a long time, folded so many times the creases almost split the paper into islands. Then life happened. A move, a breakup, a city whose alleys he learned faster than its parks. He thought he'd lost it somewhere between a cardboard box labeled important and a night he'd held his head in his hands while a judge called out 3 names in a row and not one of them had counsel. Beneath the photocopy sat a single typed line with no signature. They're about to erase her. He turned the envelope over as if the cinder might be tucked into the glue seam. Nothing. He checked the outer hall. No one was there. Chicago did its low winter hum. In the window, the buildings were a row of closed mouths. He read the essay again, faster. He read the ink like a map home. He remembered the weightless terror of the week the principal's secretary asked him to step in for a quick question, and his body learned how a floor could tilt. He remembered Grace's hand flat on his desk, not touching him, just near enough to anchor something in the room that would otherwise have drifted into the ceiling tiles. Jordan took his coat and the envelope and left a note for his paralegal that said only, family emergency. Back soon. He'd never called anything that, but the words felt true. The L line rattled like a zipper all the way to the station where he'd parked. By the time he hit the interstate, he had said Grace's name out loud twice, to make sure his mouth still knew how to shape it. Maple Bridge unspooled out of the flat land the way it always had. A water tower with flaking paint. A gas station that had changed brands, but not the cashier. Yards where winter left kids' bikes on their sides like sleeping animals. The sign that welcomed him had a dent he didn't remember. The sky was the color of old paper. He stopped at the Briar Diner because you always did, because if you try to go straight to what hurt you might miss the way a place said hello. The bell above the door chimed, then judged him. The same waitress, Anita, she would always be Anita, lifted a coffee pot without asking and poured the thing he'd been wanting since mile marker 77. Back for the holidays? She asked. Something like that, he said. A laminated flyer by the register announced a special board meeting. Facilities and integrity with a date, tonight, and the town hall address. The phrases didn't love each other. He took a photo. Lena Park slid into the opposite booth, like someone who had earned the right to skip hello. Taller than memory, hair cut blunt, eyes that reported before she spoke. She had been the kid who edited the school paper with a pen like a scalpel. Now the byline at the Maple Bridge Ledger that made the councilmen double-check their quotes. I thought you might show, she said. You got the envelope? He kept his face still. From who? Lena's smile was not warm, but it wasn't unkind. Let's say from someone who reads margins. He looked at the flyer again. Facilities and integrity? Translation, Lena said, stirring sugar into coffee she would not drink. They're closing the high school, and they're going to blame something vague from the past to make it go down easier. The kind of story people can't argue with because it has no edges. Grace. His throat did something unfamiliar on the name. Not in writing, Lena said. But there's a memo. I can't print until I can prove the who. The why is boring. Money is always the why. He wanted to ask her why she'd sent the essay, how she'd gotten it, what game she was playing. Instead, is she okay? Grace. Lena looked toward the window like the woman might be visible if you squinted. She's pruning roses in January. You tell me. He left cash under the saucer and the coffee still breathing steam. Outside, the air bit. He drove 3 turns he didn't have to think about and parked where the curb sloped in front of the Whitaker house. The clapboard had softened, paint a tired cream, but the porch swing still made the same small complaint when someone sat down. Grace Whitaker was not on the porch. She was in the yard, sleeves shoved up on a jacket older than some of Jordan's clients, fingers around pruning shears, breath like punctuation in the cold. She didn't look up until he said her name. Ms. Whitaker? Her face did a thing that started as surprise and became something gentler. Jordan Hale, you took your time. He didn't know what she thought he was late for. She solved it for him by stepping forward and touching his elbow the way she had once used one fingertip to nudge his syntax in class. You grew into your sentences, she said, as if greeting a former student meant also greeting the echo of who he had been in the chair by the window, leg jittering, pretending not to care. I always knew you would. He held up the envelope like a confession. Someone sent me my essay. I didn't, she said, but I don't mind that you have it back. He wanted to say the line from the letter, they're about to erase her, but he did not want the words to land on her without a place to sit. A young woman in a navy beanie crossed the yard and stopped a polite distance away, a notebook pressed to her ribs like a life jacket. This is Maya, Grace said. She's all tendons and tenacity, and she writes like she's standing on a cliff and knows the wind is with her. Maya's eyebrows tried to hide under the beanie. I'm applying for a scholarship, she said. Ms. Whitaker told me to cut my 3rd paragraph and put the last sentence first. Always a good start, Jordan said, and heard his voice do a teacher's cadence, a music he had absorbed and never credited. Nora arrived like a weather system, keys, bag, apology that didn't sound sorry. Mom, you can't keep the house this cold. The pipes, remember? She glanced at Jordan, cataloged the suit, the city shoes. Friend? Former student, Grace said. Current friend. Nora gave him a nod he would have to earn. Then you both can help me convince her to sign the board's settlement before this turns into... No, Grace said, small and sharp as a tack. We don't say yes to lies. Nora sighed like someone who loved and counted. It's not a lie. It's how towns survive. Money comes with silence. That's the exchange rate. Whose survival? Grace asked, eyes on the rose canes. And at what cost? Jordan watched the conversation find its grooves, the way long-lived arguments can start walking by themselves. He thought of the board flyer, of the word integrity, trying on a suit it didn't own. He said, I'm going to the meeting tonight. You always did enjoy a good argument, Grace said, the trace of smile. I hope you enjoy a good ambush. Ambush. They will not say my name, she said, but the shape of me will be in the room. He looked at Maya, whose fingers worried the edge of her notebook. You coming? I have a shift at the diner, she said, then squared her shoulders. But I can swap. Nora checked her watch. I'll be there, if only to stop you all from doing something noble and impractical. Grace clipped a cane, held it up to the light. Nobility is just practicality with a longer timeline, she said. Roses know this. Jordan folded the envelope and slid it into his coat inner pocket like a passport. He felt, stupidly, that if he kept it near his chest, the years between 16 and 35 would narrow into something you could cross on foot. He remembered the day Grace had stood between him and a rumor with nothing but her voice and a file folder and the belief that a boy could be more than the narrative convenience of guilt. Okay, he said, to the yard, to the town, to the kid he'd been. Okay. That night, the town hall smelled like old varnish and winter coats. Evan Dorsey's smile was the kind that had practiced on mirrors and found an angle the light liked. He called the meeting to order with the sound of a gavel that believed in itself. We are here, he said, to discuss the responsible stewardship of our facilities and the integrity of our institutions. Jordan felt the room tilt. Lena slid a stapled packet into his hand without looking at him. The first page was a memo header. The second was a paragraph with a lot of passive voice and one active intent, to conclude matters surrounding previous irregularities in standardized test administration and uphold community trust. There was no name. But Jordan had been a lawyer long enough to recognize the outline of a person erased. It was like looking at chalk dust after the board had been wiped and still reading the sentence underneath. He stood, and the room turned. Grace Whitaker's kitchen was a museum of function. A V-shaped crack in the linoleum, a refrigerator taped with essays and recipes, the kettle with a handle wrapped in blue electrical tape like a stubborn marriage. She moved with the easy economy of someone who had taught 1,000 mornings on not enough sleep, pulling mugs from a shelf, taps, and turns like punctuation. "Coffee," she said, not a question. Jordan leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets to keep from straightening the crooked stack of graded papers on the table. He could read the grades without looking. Her check marks always leaned right at a hopeful angle. Maya sat at the table, pen uncapped, eyes sweeping from page to page. She was all elbows and angles and an intensity that threw light. "You cut my third paragraph?" she asked, as if the act bordered on betrayal. "Revision is compression," Grace said. "Say the part you cannot say." Maya glanced up at Jordan. "Did she do this to you too?" "Oh, worse," he said, and the memory of being dismantled and rebuilt sentence by sentence warmed him like the coffee would. "She once told me my fourth paragraph should apologize to my second." Maya huffed a laugh. "She told me my thesis is hiding behind my transitions." "Because it is," Grace said, pouring coffee with a hand that trembled only when it was empty. She slid a mug to Jordan, then lowered herself into the chair opposite Maya, like someone easing into a battlefield she knew well. Nora arrived mid-sip, doors swinging on hinges that needed oil, eyes cataloging everything. The cracked mug, the unpaid bill peeking from beneath the salt shaker, the draft from the window seal that never sat right. Her coat was city-grade, armor against weather and people. "Mom," she said by way of greeting, then to Jordan, "You're still here." "I haven't left yet," he said. "That's an answer," Nora allowed. She pulled out a chair, but didn't sit. "The board's counsel called again. They're going to fast-track tonight's resolution. If we don't accept the settlement, they'll move to formalize findings." Grace's mouth thinned, then softened. "Findings of what?" "Irregularities," Nora said, which is a word that should only be used for socks. Maya frowned. Why are they blaming Ms. Whitaker? She never cheated anyone out of anything except excuses. "Because she's a symbol," Nora said, eyes landing on the stack of essays like the word itself had taken visible form. "Symbols attract narratives. Narratives clear the way for money." Jordan said, "The land sale?" Nora's glance at him was crisp. "You know about that?" "Lena does," he said, "which means the town does." Nora sighed. "I don't like any of it. But I also don't like pipes freezing and roofs leaking and my mother insisting roses are more important than insulation." "The roses will outlive the insulation," Grace said, but it was play firm, not the kind that drew blood. "Jordan," Nora said, switching to the tone of someone about to make you do something you didn't want to do, "you're a lawyer. Tell her what happens if she fights." "She'll lose time," he said. "Maybe money, maybe reputation, or," and he felt the floor find its level beneath him, "maybe she'll keep the only thing that matters about a name." Nora tapped the manila envelope he had laid on the table. "And that?" He slid out the photocopy, the red ink like a flare. "This is why I'm here." "From who?" He shook his head. "Not yet." Grace reached to touch the edge of the page. "You kept this in your jacket like it might catch cold." "It's the only passport I ever had," he said, and Maya looked at him with the kind of attention teenagers reserve for truths smuggled into jokes. The kettle wheezed. Grace turned off the flame. "We'll go to the board meeting," she said. "We'll listen. We'll let the room show us what it thinks it knows." "And if they try to set you on fire without saying your name?" Nora asked. Grace lifted her chin. "Then we'll speak plainly. I have practice." Maya tugged her beanie lower. "Can I come?" Jordan nodded before Grace could answer. "You have a stake in your school." Nora's mouth twitched. "Fine. But if any of you say anything that puts us on the hook for legal fees, I'm sending the invoices directly to your," she waved at Jordan's suit, nice Chicago shoes. He looked down at the shoes, suddenly too polished for the floor that had learned every scuff of every kid who'd run through this kitchen. "Invoice away," he said. They ate toast with too much butter like people in a house that had learned to feed whoever walked through the door. Grace showed Maya how to cut a sentence without mercy and then add back one word in the exact right place, so the thing breathed again. Nora pretended not to watch and then watched. Jordan folded and unfolded the board flyer until the edges gave up. When they left, the son had decided to try. On the porch, Grace set the pruning shears on the rail. "You know," she said without looking at anyone, "we could just not go." "We could," Nora said. "But," Grace added, "I taught you to show up." She shut the door with the careful gentleness of someone who believed objects remembered how they were treated. The Briar Diner held the town like a hand that knew where the bones were. Vinyl booze patched with duct tape, a chalkboard menu that pretended the price of eggs was stable. After-school rush had surrendered to the late afternoon lull, a time when secrets felt safe enough to sit down and order pie. Lena Park had colonized the corner booth with folders and a laptop that needed a new hinge. She lifted an eyebrow as the trio arrived. "Group rate?" "Committee," Jordan said. "Then you'll need minutes." She slid copies across the table. Public record requests finally came through. I got budget memos, maintenance logs, and a whole lot of redactions that looked suspiciously like a highlighter with a superiority complex. Maya leaned in, eyes scanning. "What am I looking at?" "Patterns," Lena said. "Missing inventory. A lost batch of standardized test booklets 12 years ago that somehow reappeared with all seals intact. A janitorial route changed the same week." And she tapped a page, a line item that pays out to a third-party storage company. Hawthorne Facilities, LLC. "Hawthorne," Jordan repeated. "Like, Evans High School mascot was the Maple Bridge Hawks," Lena said. "Subtlety is not his dominant gene." Nora slid into the end of the booth with a sigh. "Why do all shell companies sound like they belong to a man in a vest who sells you a mortgage and a promise?" "Because they do," Lena said. Anita topped off coffees with the tenderness of a priest offering absolution. "Y'all want pie or righteousness?" she asked. "Or both?" "Both," Maya said, and earned herself a slice of apple and Lena's approving nod. "Facilities and integrity," Jordan said, pointing to the flyer he'd flattened against the table like a map of a city you didn't trust. "What's the play?" "They'll talk deferred maintenance," Lena said. "Then pivot to culture and accountability and community standards. Nobody will say cheating. Everybody will think it. And if anyone says Grace's name, I'll print it in 48-point and watch the town light itself." "Please don't," Nora said. "Relax," Lena said. "My favorite stories are the ones where nobody sees the lead coming because the truth is quiet." Exhibit A. Archive boxes. She pulled up a photo. A narrow closet in a back hallway of the school. A built-in cubby painted the same color as the wall, except for a patch whose shade was just off if you knew how to see. Maya leaned closer. "That paint's newer." "Yup," Lena said. "Someone hid something badly." Jordan felt the old adrenaline that came when testimony assembled into something like a picture. "We need to get into that room." "You need a key," Anita said without looking at them, already there with a small bowl of sugar packets. "And an alarm code. And shoes that don't squeak." Lena smiled like she enjoyed being caught. "You're assuming we weren't planning to follow all applicable laws and procedures." "I'm assuming you'll take pie to go," Anita said, "because I like you alive." Jordan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Don't let them make her the price of progress." Then a second, with a link to a public portal he didn't know existed. District Security Maintenance. User Preview. "Anonymous, civic-minded person," he said, turning the phone so Lena could read. She whistled low. "Somebody just invited us to watch the fox count the hens." Nora's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game." "It's always a game," Lena said. "The trick is not to pretend it isn't." Maya pushed her plate away, half-eaten pie abandoned like a verdict. "Room 212, she said, testing the number out loud the way you test a step in the dark. I've heard seniors say there's a ghost there, that sometimes you can smell pencils even when nobody's writing. That's just nostalgia, Nora said, but softly, as if she'd smelled it too. Ghosts, Grace said, arriving at the booth last, sliding in beside Jordan like she'd been invited by the town's gravity, are only the past asking to be witnessed. It was the first time she had left the kitchen's orbit since the envelope. The light found the silver in her hair and made a halo it hadn't asked permission to make. Lena closed her laptop. You ready? Always, Grace said. But readiness isn't immunity. They left cash under cups, gathered documents, and stepped into the evening. The sky did its best impression of a bruise. On the walk to the school, their breath became a small choir. Keys, Maya said, stopping at the gate. We don't have keys. Grace reached into the pocket of her coat, the old green one that had held pens and tissues and candy for kids who didn't know they needed sugar. She took out a thin brass key attached to a tag with a fading number, 212. Retirement gift, she said. I turned in the rest. But they forgot this was on the ring. Nora stared. Mom, we will return it, Grace said, sliding the key back in her palm like a secret the night already knew. We always return what doesn't belong to us. The school after hours wore silence like a borrowed coat, too big, sleeves grazing the floor. Their footsteps echoed in hallways where bulletin boards had been emptied down to ragged staples, where a faded banner still declared reading counts in letters that had outlasted several administrations. Room 212 was at the end of a corridor that had always been a little colder. The door protested softly when the key turned, as if it had been waiting to be asked. The light switch worked on the third try. The room was exactly itself, and not itself at all. Rows of desks sat in a geometry of expectation. The whiteboard wore the ghost of a quote half erased. The measure is the child. Beneath it, the ledge held a piece of chalk someone had saved despite the era. Maya inhaled. Pencils. Grace shut her eyes for a breath that trembled and then steadied. Jordan watched her take measure of the room, the way a musician measures a stage by walking it, seeing where the sound will live. Where's the cubby? Lena asked, already scanning corners like a detective in a television show that pretended luck was a method. Grace crossed to the back wall, where the paint shade was off by not enough to notice unless you needed a thing to be found. She ran her fingertips along the baseboard until they stopped at a hairline seam. We built this shelf after a student told me home didn't have a place for her words, she said. I thought, the room can keep them until she does. Nora crouched beside her. You hit a shelf behind a wall? I taught teenagers, Grace said. Everything worth keeping requires a hiding place. Jordan knelt, found a latch by feel. Oldwood had ways that Newwood didn't, and pressed. The panel clicked. Inside, dust and paper and a shallow box with a label in Grace's neat hand, to be mailed in 10 years. Maya's breath made a sound he recognized from court when a witness realized the thing they were about to say would rearrange the air. You told us you would. I tried, Grace said. Some came back. Some addresses went stale. Some letters wanted to be found, and some wanted to be left alone. I kept what felt like a promise waiting for a door. Can we? Maya began. Not without permission, Grace said, the old classroom law returning with clean edges. But we can know they exist. Lena peered into the shelf. Is there anything else? Behind the box, tucked into the corner, a smaller envelope had slumped against the wood, the way paper does when it thinks it is time. On the front, in Grace's handwriting, 6 words. If the school forgets. Open this. Nora looked at her mother. Grace looked at the room, then at Jordan. Would you? He opened it with care that felt like a prayer. Inside, a single sheet. On one side, a list of dates and names, first names only. On the other, a clipped strip of paper, a staff keylog printout from a decade ago, the times and doors, the cold math of access. Maya's finger hovered. Those dates are the nights I stayed late, Grace said, her voice low, with kids who needed not to be alone. The week of the test photocopies, I was here every evening. Except one. Lena had already started a mental flowchart. Jordan could see it in her eyes. Which one? Tuesday, Grace said. I left at 6. There was a storm. Nora pointed to the key log. And that night, someone accessed the copy room at 8:42 p.m. Jordan felt the click of a puzzle piece that had been trying on wrong spots for years. Who had that key after hours? Administrators, Grace said. Custodial staff. And the assistant principal. The room heard what she didn't say. Evan's name hung, unspoken like a curtain no one wanted to pull. Could be anyone, Nora said, refusing the simplicity of single villain because she understood how towns worked and how people didn't. Could be, Lena agreed. But people who hide shelves do it to keep things safe. People who paint over shelves do it to keep things from being found. Maya stepped back, eyes on the rows of desks. We sat here and pretended poems were safer than the truth. They're a way to carry it, Grace said. That's not the same as safety. A hum interrupted them. The low, bureaucratic sound of a building that had decided to remain alive. Jordan checked his phone. A push notification from the public portal. After-hours access recorded, storage hallway, 2:14 a.m. The timestamp was last night. Someone's been here, he said. Nora's face arranged itself into anger before fear could. Which means we shouldn't be. We should, Grace said. But we should be fast. They slid the panel back, smoothed the paint with their palms, as if apology could be tactile. Grace held the "if the school forgets" envelope like a relic, then gave it to Lena. Copy it, she said. Then it goes back where it was. Lena nodded, already seeing angles and backups and offsite drives. They turned off the lights, closed the door, sealed the hallway behind them with care. On the way out, Maya paused by the whiteboard, picked up the chalk, and traced over the ghost of the sentence until the words brightened. The measure is the child. Now they can't say they didn't see it, she said, and left the chalk on the ledge. Part 5, the scholarship that vanished. It was the kind of night that pressed against windows like a question. The town hall crowded itself with coats and breath and the complicated sound of people deciding whether they were brave. Evan Dorsey smiled his mirror smile and practiced empathy on the room like a learned language. Stewardship, he said, and standards, and the future. The words did their smooth work, fitting themselves to fears like lids. Jordan stood because his body stood before his brain decided, because the room used to having him seated didn't know what to do when he wasn't. Point of order, he said, voice flat as a blade. If you're going to cite irregularities from the past as pretext to close a living school, say whose irregularities and when, and under what authority you're smearing unnamed employees. The gavel fell with prissy indignation. Mr. Hale, he said, alumnus, attorney, person with a memory. We do not name individuals. Evan said in a tone that implied nobility where convenience lived. We protect privacy. You weaponize vagueness, Jordan said. Which is different. Murmurs. Lena watched from the back with her reporter's composure that always made people forget her heart was involved. Nora stood not to speak, but to be seen. Sometimes bodies did the work words couldn't. Maya, cheeks bright with adrenaline or terror or both, gripped her notebook like it could testify. Evan leaned forward. Mr. Hale, you left this community. Trust that those who stayed are making responsible decisions. I left, Jordan said evenly, the way a person leaves a burning house. A good teacher got me a scholarship that paid the water on the flames. He felt the pivot in the room, the shift in oxygen when a flame finds new wood. He hadn't planned to tell it. He heard himself anyway. Senior year, he said, eyes on the grain of the table so the story would land in wood and not in faces. I was accused of cheating. Someone had an answer sheet that matched mine. I hadn't cheated, but my name made the accusation convenient. I was poor. I was new enough to being seen that I didn't know how to look back. Grace sat 2 rows back still. Her hand was on her coat, not her heart, but he knew where the pulse was. I would have lost the scholarship, Jordan said. Except Ms. Whitaker sat with the committee and spoke to my work with a specificity that was impossible to fabricate. She brought drafts with margin notes in her hand, my handwriting in all its mess, the wrong turns and the right ones. She told them if my future was going to be taken, they should do in the light. Evan's smile faltered, then reassembled. This is very touching, Mr. Hale, but irrelevant to a facilities discussion. It's the only relevant thing, Jordan said. Because if the variable you're calling irregularity is the human one, if it's a teacher keeping a kid in the building long enough to finish a sentence, then say that out loud and call it what it is, stewardship. A woman in the second row, Jordan recognized her from algebra, a mother now, hair threaded with gray, said, "Amen," small and furious. Evan tapped the gavel again, afraid of where the room might go if it got to decide for itself. We are not here to litigate memories. Then let's litigate records, Lena said, stepping forward, producing a printed still frame like a magician who preferred data to rabbits. District Security Portal. Timestamp 2:14 a.m. Last night. Storage hallway. Someone removing an archive box from room 212's built-in. Heads turned. The screen Evan hadn't planned to use lit up with the image once Anita, who somehow was everywhere, found the input. The frame showed a figure with the posture of a man who believed nobody could see him. The resolution wasn't generous, but it didn't need to be. A cuff at the wrist caught the light. The tiny glint had a hawk's head. Evan inhaled. His smile left and did not come back. Cufflinks are an odd choice for an archival errand, Lena said. But I hear some men like to feel formal while they commit wrongdoing. That could be anyone, a board member said, loyalty and fear wrestling in his voice. Could be, Lena said, which is why I also brought a statement from Lou Ramirez. He remembers an assistant principal in that copy room the week the test booklets went missing and reappeared. He remembers a hawk. He is dying, so he has no time left to lie. It was a different time, Evans said, and Jordan knew the tone. The one people used when facts threatened to bend the story out of their hands. Pressures were intense. For all of us. And now, Maya asked, voice shaking but sure. Now the pressure is on us. On kids who didn't do anything but grow up in a town where adults are tired. Silence swallowed the room. Then Grace stood, not because she loved to stand, but because sitting would have been a lie. She didn't look at Evan. She looked at the board as if they were her class on a day she had decided to teach them something they had not signed up for. The measure is the child, she said. It always has been. If you want to close a building, own the budget, own the politics, own the years of choices that led to this moment. Do not pretend integrity is a line item that can be paid with someone's name. Nora's eyes shone. A complicated pride fought through the worry. Jordan felt something old and knotted loosen, a thread pulled gently until a snare released. Evan reached for the gavel. His hand shook, motioned to table until further investigation. One of the board members said, voice too quick, as if obeying a cue he hadn't realized he'd been given. Second, another said, as if safety could be found in following. All in favor? Hands rose like a field of wheat deciding wind was safer than fire. The gavel fell. Motion carries. It was not victory. It was pause. But sometimes a pause is the most radical thing a town can do. Outside, the night had thinned. The streetlight buzzed like a tired bee. Jordan and Grace and Nora and Lena and Maya stood for a minute in the fine cold, not talking, as if words might scare off whatever had decided to hover. Maya spoke first. What now? Now we keep receipts, Lena said. Now, Nora said, softer than her coat. We take Mom home and feed her soup. Now, Grace said, we sleep. Tomorrow I'll show you the letters. Jordan looked at her. The ones to be mailed in 10 years. She nodded. The ones we didn't. He felt the envelope in his coat, next to his chest where he had kept it all day, warming the paper with breath he hadn't known was still human. Okay, he said, and the word wasn't surrender or bravado. It was a promise to the kid he'd been and the woman who had taught him how to revise. They walked to the cars. The town exhaled. Somewhere, a rosebush in January decided to survive one more night. The library after hours was a shipwreck of microfilm reels and forgotten card catalogs. Lena fed the machine with a rhythm like shuffling a deck, the screen flickering from blurred nothing into fragments of town history. Bake sales, storm warnings, honor rolls no one remembered. There, Jordan said, pointing when a page showed an accident report. Janitorial slip in room 212. Week of state testing. Lou Ramirez. The custodian. A fall, minor injury. Date circled red in Lena's notes. Custodial routes were shifted after this, she said. Guess whose office oversaw scheduling? Evans, Jordan said. The name tasted metallic. Maya leaned over the machine, her hair brushing the edge of the lens. So Evan had the keys, changed the routes, and was in charge of copying tests? Circumstantial, Jordan said, lawyer in him alive again. Pattern, Lena countered. And patterns lead to motive. Grace sat a little apart, hands folded, listening. She looked not at the machine, but at Jordan. Do you remember the night I found you here? He blinked. With the essay drafts? You were rewriting until 2 a.m, she said. You thought if you didn't sleep, no one could say you hadn't tried. Maya's eyes widened. You were like me. Jordan smiled faintly. No one's like you. The reel clicked to an end. Lena pulled the strip and packed it away. Let's go home before the night desk starts asking why. The next board meeting was velvet over steel. Evan Dorsey presided like a man auditioning for higher office, every syllable polished, every pause a performance. We honor our educators, he said smoothly, while acknowledging that integrity requires courage. The room hummed with words that didn't land. Nora whispered. Translation. Grace is guilty without being named. Jordan rose. Point of order, again. Evan smiled. Mr. Hale, still visiting? Still caring, Jordan said. Still remembering when vague language destroyed reputations. Maya whispered to Lena, he's going to get thrown out. But Jordan didn't. The board chair only gestured for him to sit, the gavel unused. Politeness had become the blade. Procedure, the sheath. Grace leaned toward Maya. Listen carefully. This is how towns decide truths without naming them. They wrap them in words until no one recognizes the face. Afterward, outside the hall, Maya typed furious notes. We need people to know. They will, Lena said, tucking her recorder away. Truth is quieter than lies, but it lasts longer. At Grace's house, Nora spread spreadsheets across the kitchen table, her pen tapping columns like a weapon. Property taxes late. Utilities behind. Medical bills stacked. If we fight, Mom, and they drag your name through hearings, this house goes. I built more in these walls than debt, Grace said. Legacy doesn't pay for heating oil, Nora snapped. Jordan wanted to intervene, but Grace lifted a hand. Let her speak. Nora's voice cracked despite her armor. You've always chosen your students over me. Over us. Now I'm going to fight the whole board for an idea. Why? For pride? Not pride, Grace said. Her eyes were soft but unwavering. Truth. And for children who cannot stand in rooms like this and speak for themselves. Nora closed her ledger hard enough the coffee trembled. Then you'd better hope the truth keeps the roof from leaking. She left the table, her footsteps echoing upstairs. Maya whispered, she's scared. Grace nodded. Fear is honest. I respect it, but fear is not the teacher. They walked the creek path at twilight, the old bridge's wooden planks groaning under weight and history. Grace carried a cardboard box, worn soft at the edges. These, she said, setting it on the railing, were letters my seniors wrote to their future selves. I promised to mail them in 10 years. But I didn't. Addresses vanished. People moved, and I feared reopening wounds. Jordan lifted one envelope. His own messy teenage scrawl. Unmailed. Unopened. You kept them, he said. They were still yours, Grace said. I wasn't their owner, only their guardian. Maya peered into the box. These are like time machines. Jordan felt the bridge sway under his feet. Or landmines. The creak whispered beneath them. Grace's hand rested lightly on the box. When you keep the past, you inherit its duty. Tonight, perhaps we inherit together. Grace's attic smelled of cedar and mothballs, the air sharp with memory. Among boxes of lesson plans and faded posters, Jordan found a smaller carton labeled in her script. Lesson plans, crisis weeks. Inside, red ink outlines of essays, attendance sheets annotated with notes like sat with K. After test panic or walked L. Home after fight. At the bottom, a sealed envelope. Bold letters, if the school forgets. They opened it together on the floor. A list of dates, names, scribbled in Grace's hand. And taped inside, a strip of staff keylog entries. Doors open, time stamped, initials coded. Jordan ran his finger down the sheet until he stopped. Copy room, 8:42 p.m. ED. Lena exhaled like a verdict. Evan Dorsey. Tuesday night. The missing tests. The paper edges were sharp. Jordan's finger nicked, a bead of blood welling. He stared at it absurdly and thought, paper cuts come from what you never thought would hurt you. Grace touched the list. I wrote this in case memory alone wasn't enough. Because someday I knew someone would try to erase what mattered. The attic groaned as if the house itself remembered. Lena's car smelled faintly of ink and stale coffee, the natural perfume of a reporter's life. She drove Jordan to a hospice wing 2 towns over, where Lou Ramirez, the former night custodian, waited in a room that hummed with machines and the slow dignity of endings. Lou's eyes flickered open when they entered. His hands, liver-spotted and trembling, gripped the blanket like rope. You were the teacher's kid, he rasped at Jordan. Her student, Jordan corrected gently. I need to ask about the week of the tests. Lou's smile was thin, amused. Knew I'd take that memory with me. He coughed, a rattle in his lungs. But maybe it doesn't belong to me. He described a man in the copy room late at night, jacket sleeves rolled, gold glint at the wrist. Not supposed to be there. I told him once, sir, that room's locked. He said he had clearance. I saw the hawk. The cufflink, Lena said quietly. Lou's eyes filmed with pain. That's right. The hawk. Always looking down. The nurse came in to shoo them away, but Lou caught Jordan's sleeve with surprising strength. Don't let them write her out. She's the reason some kids made it. That's the truth. Jordan squeezed his hand. I won't. Walking out, Lena said, testimony. Imperfect, but testimony. And sometimes ghosts speak louder than the living. The next night, room 212 felt less like nostalgia and more like crime scene. The cubby was open, but the box of letters was gone. Empty, Maya whispered, her flashlight beam cutting into dust. On Jordan's phone, the security portal pinged again. A grainy still frame showed a figure in the hallway, moving a box under one arm. The timestamp, 2:14 a.m. The cufflink flashed again, a hawk's head catching the light. Same suit, same glint, Lena said grimly. He came back. Grace's shoulders slumped. Not defeat, but bone-deep weariness. They're trying to steal what students wrote to themselves. Their own voices. Nora's voice shook with rage. He's not just scapegoating you. He's erasing kids. That's psychotic. Jordan felt heat behind his ribs. Then we make sure the theft becomes evidence, not erasure. Lena nodded, already opening her laptop. Screenshots, backups, metadata. We'll build a case. Grace bent down and ran her palm along the empty shelf. Letters can be stolen, but truth? Truth remembers its own name. Later, at Grace's dining table, Jordan unfolded his old essay again. Her handwriting in the margins spoke like a second voice, calm where his younger self had panicked. Start where it hurts, but don't end there. He stared at the phrase. You knew. Even then, Grace smiled faintly. I knew you wanted to be more than the sentence people were writing for you. All I did was refuse to let that draft be final. Maya listened, chin propped on her fist. So revision is hope. Exactly, Grace said. Hope with a red pen. Jordan leaned back. I've been cross-examining witnesses for 10 years, and I've never once thought of it as revision. Only combat. Maybe that's why it feels empty. Grace touched the essay with 2 fingers. Maybe it's time to stop arguing against and start revising for. The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet where an idea lands and waits for someone to admit it out loud. It began with one, a man Jordan barely remembered from algebra, now gray at the temples, standing on Grace's porch with his own unmailed letter. Found this in my parents' attic, he said. I think I'm supposed to give it back. Then more came. A woman with twins in tow, clutching her essay with Grace's red notes still visible. A former athlete, now limping from an old injury, who said, she kept me from flunking out when I wanted to quit. The town swelled with testimony. Social media lit up with posts. Ms. Whitaker was the reason I finished school. She bought me lunch when no one knew. She sat with me after my brother died. Lena tracked them, catalog patterns. Every time a student's crisis lined up with an irregularity, Grace was there. That's the anomaly, she noticed. Evan's narrative started to crack under the weight of hundreds of ordinary, undeniable voices. Maya typed furiously. They're not ghosts anymore. They're here. Grace only shook her head softly. They've always been here. The measure is the child, and the children are speaking. Jordan cornered Evan Dorsey outside the grocery store, under the jaundiced glow of the lot lights. You took the box, Jordan said flatly. Evan's smile was sharp, teeth too white against the dark. Allegations, Mr. Hale. You should know better than to fling them without proof. We have proof. Security footage. Blurry footage, Evan corrected smoothly. In a dying man's memory. Hardly admissible. Jordan stepped closer. Why erase students' letters? What threat do they pose to you? They remind people of promises, Evan said, his voice low now, the mask slipping. And promises are liabilities when you're trying to move land deals through quietly. So it's about the sale, Jordan said. It's always about the sale, Evan said. Don't kid yourself. Legacy is just branding. And your Ms. Whitaker is a brand past its shelf life. Jordan's jaw tightened. If you drag her down, you'll answer for it. Evan adjusted his cufflink, the hawk glinting once more. You think courtrooms scare me? I've been writing narratives since you were still stumbling through syntax. Ask yourself, attorney, when the town chooses between nostalgia and progress, who wins? Jordan didn't answer. He only watched as Evan slid into his car, the taillights painting the lot red as blood. Behind him, Lena whispered, he thinks he's untouchable. Jordan stared at the receding lights. Then we prove he isn't. The recovered essays lay across Grace's dining table, spread like evidence at trial. Maya flipped page after page, reading voices from a decade ago. Heartbreak, ambition, anger, fragile hope. Then she froze. This handwriting isn't like the others. Jordan leaned over her shoulder. The draft was sloppy but unmistakably male. Confessions of copying, lines crossed out in panic. At the margin, Grace's old red ink. On your name, Mr. Dorsey. Evan, Lena whispered. This is his teenage essay. Nora looked up from the ledger she'd been pretending to study. So he cheated once. Big deal. No, Jordan said. This is origin. He learned then that shame could be hidden, that reputation could be managed. He's been rewriting his story ever since. Grace touched the page gently, almost tenderly. He was a child once, too. I tried to give him the same chance as any other. Maya frowned, and he used that chance to build a mask. The essays rustled in the draft from the open window, as if the voices inside them wanted to testify. The board chamber overflowed. Former students lined the walls, letters in hand, their presence pressing heat into the room. Evan opened the session with his trademark calm. We must act responsibly, not sentimentally. Jordan rose, this time not alone but flanked by Grace, Lena, Maya, and half the town. He laid the security's still frame on the table, Lou Ramirez's statement, and finally the essay in Evan's teenage script. "You've built a career on narratives," Jordan said. "But narratives crack when the record speaks. You were in the copy room. You manipulated tests. And now, decades later, you tried to bury the only teacher who told you to own your name." The room murmured. The cufflink on Evan's wrist gleamed like guilt under a spotlight. He tried to pivot. We were all under pressure. Grace's voice cut through, calm but devastating. Pressure does not absolve. It reveals. And the measure is always the child. Gasps, murmurs, applause rising like a tide. The board chair's gavel stuttered against the table, unable to silence the crowd. The motion to close the school faltered under scrutiny. The board voted instead to pause for investigation. Evan's face, pale under the fluorescent lights, looked suddenly small. That night, Nora broke in the kitchen, ledger open but unread. "I was just trying to keep you safe, Mom. I didn't want you dragged through courtrooms, headlines, humiliation." Grace sat beside her, wrapping a frail but steady hand over her daughter's. "Safety is not the same as silence. You've carried me with such fierceness, Nora, but you don't have to carry alone." Tears slipped down Nora's face. "I've spent years resenting that you gave everything to your students. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I still am." Grace's eyes softened. "Love is not pie. More for them was never less for you. But I should have said it more often." Jordan, leaning in the doorway, understood something about wounds you don't name. They calcify. Tonight, one had cracked open, painful but finally breathing. They returned to room 212 one last time. Maya traced the baseboard, found the latch Grace had shown her. Inside, behind the empty cubby, a false back revealed a second compartment no one had checked. This box was smaller, dusty, untouched. Inside, the true time capsule. Dozens of letters sealed by trembling teenage hands. And at the very bottom, one addressed simply, to Ms. Whitaker. From J. H. Jordan's throat closed as he opened it. His own handwriting clumsy with youth. "If you're reading this, it means you didn't give up on me. Please don't. I don't know how to believe in myself yet. But if you believe, maybe someday I will." The room went utterly still. Grace pressed the letter to her chest, eyes shining. "I did believe. Always." They chose a handful of letters, shared aloud, with permission from the authors now grown. Words of fear, courage, longing. The town heard its children's voices echo back across decades. The ghosts had become witnesses. The board reversed course. The sale collapsed. Evan resigned under pressure, his cufflinks suddenly ridiculous in the morning paper. But Grace refused sainthood. No benches. No statues. "If you want to honor me, start a night school. Fund scholarships. Teach revision like survival." Maya won her scholarship. Lena published a story that won more than headlines. It won respect. Nora moved her mother into her own house, not out of pity, but partnership. And Jordan? He drove back to Chicago with the photocopied essay still folded in his coat. But now he carried more than nostalgia. He called Grace every Sunday. He mentored Maya's classmates remotely. He let himself revise the draft of his own life. On Briar Street, roses bloomed against the odds, petals opening into air that remembered winters and forgave them. Grace Whitaker stood in her yard, watching children pass by on their way to a school that still stood because voices had refused erasure. And somewhere in the town's marrow, the words lived on. The measure is the child.